Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Great program today. Geoff Green is with me. He's the Chief Executive Officer at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation. He's also a nonprofit expert. He's a great guy. We had a great time. You're going to enjoy it. Geoff Green, The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you've joined us. You can always find us at goodlifetelevision.org, where you can see all the interviews, as well as what we call power clips, which are kind of special moments from all those interviews. There's some great people. Over the last year, we've had a lot of wonderful guests. We've learned a lot, from entrepreneurs to young people, public servants, athletes. We've had a little bit of everything. So it's been a lot of fun. We hope you'll join us at goodlifetelevision.org. And I'm so glad to have my guest here today. Geoff Green is with me. Geoff, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Geoff is the CEO at the Santa Barbara City College Foundation, which is here obviously in Santa Barbara where we are. And Geoff's had a very interesting kind of journey in business, specifically the nonprofit world, that I'm excited to unpack. But first of all, just tell me, you grew up in the San Francisco area. Tell me a little bit about your growing up and your family.
Certainly. So I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. My mom was a sixth grade teacher. Actually, a whole lot of folks in my family are teachers. Oh, really? To this day. My dad was a juvenile probation officer. So the joke was I got away with nothing, which was only kind of a joke. I grew up there, went to school there through the public school system, and then came down to Santa Barbara in 1990 to go to UCSB. So that's what brought me to town. And my full intention and assumption was that this was just for college, and I'd head either back north or elsewhere. And some 30 years later, here I am.
Here you are. So. Well, and after college, you had a dream to go to Yosemite, yes. And be a park ranger.
Yeah, that was my dream job from the time I can remember. My parents went there, my grandparents before them, I'm sure even before them. That was sort of a family camping tradition, and I have a photo, I think, of when I was 6 months old standing in front of Yosemite Falls.
Really?
So that was something I loved to do. I thought it was a way to combine all the different things I loved, and I thought, well, if I could be a park ranger, that would be perfect. And sure enough, I had the opportunity to do that at first as an intern. Actually, there was an intern program organized through the universities, and then as a full-time ranger naturalist for a few years, and I did that until 1997.
Yeah, and then you came to join the Fund for Santa Barbara. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's what brought me back.
And talk about that that season in your life and your career.
Yeah, well, I was, I'm a proud generalist. It's interesting that I work alongside academic specialists because I'm the opposite of that. And I, in a earlier time, it probably would have been called a Renaissance person, but these days it's just considered unfocused. So,
Renaissance is better.
I like Renaissance better. I really wanted to do. I love the educating, public speaking, connecting with people. I had done a lot of different things through my college time too. I gotten very involved in student politics, running for office and sitting on the student senate and associated student president, and those sorts of things. I did a lot of volunteer work. I got really interested in solving homelessness and housing issues. A lot of environmental work was really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I'd done a radio show for a while on our KCSB public radio station there. So it was just sort of a little bit of everything, and when I was trying to figure out, I ultimately decided that coming back to Santa Barbara was what I wanted to do. But the question was how, and what would I possibly do, and who would pay me to do it.
Right.
So the Fund for Santa Barbara ended up being the place, and it was largely because the link between all the things I was really passionate about were what you might broadly call sort of social justice issues. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to figure out how to solve some of those big problems.
Right.
And the Fund was a hub for that, and they really were a spot for supporting innovative grassroots, in many cases experiments in the nonprofit sector. Huh. And so that's what that was before cell phones, and I remember I had to fax my resume. And
right.
If you remember faxes,
I do.
And then have a phone interview, and then drive down here, and then drive back, and
wow.
But that's what brought me back.
I want to talk about the Santa Barbara City College Foundation that you lead, and kind of maybe start with kind of your vision for that foundation, and specifically the SBCC promise part of this.
Sure.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any experience with community college personally. Well, actually, I say that that's not true. I had two things that only later occurred to me. One is that I had taught a course through adult education on homelessness and housing policy with a co-teacher who was a faculty member at UCSB, and I think that was in around the year 2000. And then I'd also taken Spanish classes, and so I had a little bit of experience. But when the one program I really knew well when I started in 2015 with the SBCC Foundation was called Transitions. And it's only because we funded it as the Fund for Santa Barbara. And this is for men and women who are incarcerated who want to come back straight into college. And so they do prep and enrollment while they're incarcerated so that they can come back and enroll immediately afterward. And so I was aware of that program. I thought it was fantastic. It was one of the earlier ones in the nation. It's not that uncommon these days, but that was one of the earlier. And so I ultimately found the link between the things I loved and this role. But it was a strange way to enter. I mean, it was sort of a back and forth with the board at the time about, was this what did they want to do, and did I want to be the guy to do it, and could we work together in these ways? So once we got there and I got excited about this role, I had a lead time of a few months. And during that, President Obama at the time and Governor Bill Haslam, so the Democratic president, Republican governor of Tennessee, which in itself was remarkable. There's very little bipartisanship happening. And they did a joint press conference on a thing called the Tennessee Promise. And that was the first time I ever heard the term. And it caught my ear, and I listened to what they were promoting. And it wasn't long before I started to hear more and more about that and really dive into that notion. And there's another funny side note. Tom Hanks, who I don't have to explain who Tom Hanks is. Tom Hanks, when I was growing up as a kid, he'd gone to Chabot College, which was the community college nearest where I grew up in the East Bay Area, in Hayward there.
Okay.
And basically, in my region, you had to know three things growing up. You had to know reading, writing, and Tom Hanks went to Chabot. That's what you had to know, because this is the era where Big and all the big films come up. So he wrote a couple of pieces actually. One in particular that got circulated widely about the value of community colleges, and so that was kind of an exciting junction for me between that reality, my memories of being a kid and knowing that he was a community college graduate, and then all of the things that were starting to happen around College Promise. So it was early in my time. I started in February 2015, and within the first few months, every conference I went to, there was some conversation about College Promise. And the basic notion is that the idea of universal public education for up to high school was actually a fairly controversial debate 100 years ago in this country. Does everybody need it? Why should people go to high school if they can run the family business, the family farm, if they can read and write? And of course, today you push that another 4 years further, and it's for many people, high school isn't enough for whatever they may want to do. And community college now is the question, I think, at hand. And I think it is the best possible tool for advancement, whether it be personal, personally pursuing your own dreams and building your own skill set, or families being healthy and having the income they need, or socioeconomic advancement. Frankly, anything. So the idea is, can we as a society pay for every young person who wants to go to community college for 2 years? And that's the beginning of the idea.
And where does that go for you? I mean, how are you pursuing that vision?
Well, I ran into, as I said early on, that was something that was talked about at every conference, every conversation. And of course, I was brand new, learning my role. Not new to philanthropy or the community, but certainly new to the community college part of it. And discovered that there were 3 predecessors in our state. So in California, which has the largest community college system, largest higher ed system in the Western world, 116 campuses and colleges now, 72 districts, over 2 million students. A quarter of all community college students in the United States go to a California community college. And there were 3 in California that had started experiments with what they called the Promise. And the first was actually our neighbor Ventura College. And the second was Long Beach, and the third, which had just happened, was at Cuesta College, our other neighbor to the north. Well, just jumping over Hancock to the north. And so I started to get to know what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it, and hearing about that model, and then looking for something that would solve a bigger issue. And as I said, that was my big passion really, is how do you structurally deal with some of the challenges we have in our community? I mean, scholarships are wonderful, but they don't solve the bigger structural problem. They help that one student. And so this was, to me, an idea of how do you solve the bigger structural problem of affordability and access to college. And so we started asking around, and what we found was that there was a pretty good consensus of what would work and how to do it right, how to do it well, but nobody to that point had done it because it was a very expensive proposition, especially for community colleges, since our philanthropic infrastructure is really nascent. I mean, if you think about the four-year institutions, the Ivy Leagues, they figured this out 200 years ago.
Right.
I mean, it's a core part of the institution. If you look at the four-year public universities, it was really the 80s and 90s where they started to build their infrastructure for fundraising and development. And for us, it feels like last Tuesday. You know, we just figured this out, and we're still figuring it out. But the value of being at Santa Barbara City College is that we have one of the largest and one of the oldest foundations in the nation, actually, for community colleges. And so the idea of raising $2 to $3 million a year for a program like this was not unthinkable. And so that's really how we started. We started to build it that way. We leaned on the research and the experiments that had been done by our colleagues before us, so that we didn't have to repeat those painful mistakes ourselves.
Right. Wow.
And that's what we launched in 2015.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
This is obviously an interesting environment. Seems like it's getting more interesting by the day here in the year 2020. But
yeah,
I would, reading your information here, I mean, you're clearly a nonprofit expert or a fundraising professional. You've been on all these councils and boards. And what is your council? I know that there seems like there's kind of a buzzword in the nonprofit world in recent years, sustainability.
Yep.
And I know you do a lot of consulting and things like that. How do you advise nonprofits toward a path that is sustainable?
That's a great question. And yes, that is one of the key issues for nonprofit organizations. I think the first thing, I mean, clarity of mission is always first. So you got to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. I'm a form follows function kind of guy, so I don't have any religion about a particular model being the best, but I do believe that you have to be clear on what you're doing, and then you build the structure that supports that thing, whatever it is. And for nonprofits, it's revenue strategy above all, because that's the thing that you have to figure out once you've got your mission clear.
Right.
How do you sustain it? How do you make it happen? And almost as a rule, the more diverse the income stream, the better. So you want to help people figure out what are all the different ways that you can earn those dollars. And the primary reason for that, and this is true in for-profit business as well, is that the most sustainable, the most resilient income stream is the one that's the most diverse. And that's because if one of them goes sideways, it doesn't sink you. So you can lose all of your grant funding, or you can lose all of your earned income, or you can lose all of your major donor base for a short time and be okay, as long as that was only just a piece of it. But for those nonprofits that are dependent on one or two grant makers, or a handful of donors, or a very specific single income source that's an earned revenue source, that's the most dangerous, because something's going to happen at some point that's going to endanger that. And once that does happen, you got to be ready with a backup plan. So that's a big part of it. The other piece is the board structures, and I'm a kind of a board junkie, if you will.
Are you?
I like boards. I actually like working with boards.
That's so wonderful.
And I sit on boards, and I help other people do that. And it's because it's one of those volunteer jobs where there's only one reason to be there, and that is that you got to be passionate about that mission. You got to love doing it, because that's the reward. You're in the nonprofit sector, you're not getting paid to be on a board. It is a lot of time if you do want to do it well, and you have to be an evangelist for the cause, whatever it may be, out in the community. So I think that having the right board, having the right overall structure, and the income revenue structure is the key once you've got the mission clear.
That's great.
So.
And do you advise boards? Is that part of what you do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, so the fund, it was interesting for me that the fund, I kind of parlayed my love of teaching, and at least my version of it, alongside my passion for the nonprofit sector. And then at the fund, we had a technical assistance program, still very much there and thriving. And that's just a jargony term for everything but the check. So what other support can you offer? And so it was access to resources and teaching and models and all that. And so I started to do a lot of that and just kind of share what I had seen that worked, or what I'd learned, or what I knew from experience. And that kind of built and built and built. And that's ultimately what made me a I guess a consultant. I'll put that in finger
Yeah, well,
quotes.
no, I mean, if you're an expert, you're an expert.
But I do love it, and then that's where it started. So I do. I don't do as much as I once did because the work with the foundation is absolutely a full-time job.
Yeah.
But I do. I mean, there's a lot of partnerships there. You know, the lines are, in my opinion, very, very gray between what our work is and what these other partners' work might be. So we work with a lot of folks, and some of that is helping and coaching and mentoring boards.
I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a great board, and I'm so thankful if they're watching.
Yeah, I saw that. They're watching.
They might be watching. They are great. But I was, as I've worked with our board, I've realized what you just said, which is the only reason you're there is for love. You know, I mean, this is going to be. There is. I mean, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of fanfare, not a lot of benefit to this. There's no personal benefit. I mean, it is purely a service thing, and it can be a lot of work. Yeah. And these are the people that have the fiduciary responsibility for this. It's not the staff.
That's right.
You know, they have all the responsibility on their shoulders, and yet they're unpaid total volunteers.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky.
It is. Thing. It's where the buck stops, and there is a lot of debate, theoretical and wonky nonprofit circles about, does that model still work, and what is that? And the place I've always started, and usually when I'm doing a training for a new board or a younger board, it's to kind of frame it in the legal framework in which a board exists. And really, it's the tax status. So, and we can talk about business in a moment here, but I'm fond of saying that 501c3 is a tax status, not a business model. Because nonprofits are businesses in every way.
Yeah, I don't think they should be called nonprofits myself.
I know.
I think they should be called tax-exempt organizations.
Well, yeah. I mean, how many organizations define themselves by what they're not? I mean, you don't say I'm a.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And if you're a nonprofit, you're not going to be in business.
That's right. That's right. So I'm with you. Let's start that. We'll start that campaign.
Let's do it.
I need something else to do. Let's do that. Well, I think there's some really good points there, and the way that the nonprofit sector was. The trade that we make in the nonprofit sector is that by making the case that our mission is in itself of value. I mean, the idea of taxation is that you're taxed on your commerce or your income or all the things we're taxed on because we have to pay into the common good. So whatever that common good that we all want to share the cost of. And nonprofits make the case that they are the common good, that they're basically what they do is as valuable as any tax they might pay. And so they're excused from some of their taxes. Not all, and people forget that. I mean, we're tax-paying organizations. We pay payroll tax and a lot of the larger taxes. But the idea is they do that, and then in turn, the community, and in this case, the people of the state of California, because nonprofits are incorporated by state just like for-profits are, have the obligation and opportunity to basically make sure that they're making good on their mission. And that's really what the board is supposed to be. Is the representatives of the people of the state to govern and make sure that the nonprofit is doing what it says.
Right.
And so it is an unusual dynamic, especially when you have a long-time or a founding executive director. Nobody's ever going to know more about that work than that person, and yet they report to and ultimately are governed by a board of directors of volunteers.
Right.
So yeah, it's a funny dance.
It
to
is.
Be sure.
No, that's for sure. You've had an interest in homelessness.
Yes.
And I know you've been involved in the efforts here locally for a long time. Mm-hmm. Talk about kind of that interest and also the progress we've made and kind of where you see it going from here.
Yeah, so I'll be very clear. I think housing is a human right. I think we all deserve safe shelter of some kind, and it is, and for most people, fortunately, they do that through their ability to earn an income and pay for housing on the open market. But for others who can't, for any number of reasons, I think one of the things that we're called to do as a community, as a society, is figure out, okay, so then what? And I have been really interested in that because it's the most expensive piece of our living arrangement for everybody. I mean, housing usually is the biggest piece of what you pay for. Right. And so there's no easy solution because you can't just do it in a quick way. And of course, emergency shelter beds are critical, but they don't solve the bigger problem. So how do you put that system together? So someone who's on the street has a place to go on a cold night, which people can identify with generally. The soup kitchen model, the shelter bed model. But then ultimately, where do they go from there? What do you need to get there? And I think there's been a lot of really smart, good experiments, and there are thousands of people committed to this work, but it's telling that we've not solved it.
Right.
So 10 years, well, I shouldn't say 10 years ago. I think it was now 12 to 13 years ago. There was a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And this was a wave of things that came out. The Bush administration had a program at a national level that had pushed this notion of a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. And so a lot of communities signed on to that. There was federal funding for it. And our community was one of them. And I was part of this group of, I think, 40 people that crafted this plan. And if you read the plan today, it's a smart plan. It still holds up. But the fact is we didn't do it. And the reason is we didn't commit the necessary resources. And that happens time and time again, place after place. There's a moment where people's eyes are on the issue, and then it drifts. And so I think political will and philanthropic consistency are the two biggest challenges.
So money was the problem.
I think money and political focus. I mean, it's not a sexy issue. It's a hard one to deal with, especially if you see it up close. So there's those moments where you hear about something, and then of course there's the flip side of the issue, which is where people don't want someone who's been living on the streets for a month on their front doorstep. They feel like this is an invasion of my space or my property or my privacy, or just it's an unpleasant reminder of the reality of what our community really is made up of. And so so we have to balance the notion of making sure that our public spaces are clean and safe, but with offering real shelter. Because you don't just, if you move people on, you don't solve the problem. And we've seen that time and time again. People have been shooed away from places, and in some cases legitimately so. I'm not suggesting folks should just say, oh, okay, well, there's nowhere to sleep, so you might as well sleep here. But we have to remember that it's, the homelessness epidemic is tied with a mental health crisis.
Right.
It's tied with our wealth inequality. It's tied, and income inequality, which of course we know has been growing. And it's tied with a whole range of other things that, frankly, it's really costly to do it the way we do it now. And there were some stories, it was probably 5-6 years ago, $1 Million Murray and these sort of headlines that caught everybody's eye that said that, if you actually calculate the cost of caring for someone who has no shelter, their time in and out of jail, their time in and out of rehab, their time in and out of hospitals and emergency rooms, it is a really expensive way to live. And so what they made the economic argument. So even if the moral imperative or the social imperative or anything else wasn't enough, you could make that economic argument that it's actually cheaper to just house everybody. And the sort of housing first model was
I was just going to ask you about that. The housing first model kind of became a thing. I've seen that in the apartment complex we had in Dallas, where we had a permanent. We had 488 units in one complex. Everything's big in Texas. 488 units. 70 of them, or somewhere around 70 of them, were a permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless. They had to be chronically homeless with a disability, which could be alcoholism, could be. But if you had those two things, and you submitted to the program, which included testing, you had a caseworker, it was permanent. And I thought it worked well.
That's brilliant.
It was now unfortunately there's not a lot of complexes, like where we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And, but I saw the housing part where you put a roof over somebody's head, and we'd have a bed for them and a couch, and that then it gave you a shot at answering some of the other.
Exactly.
It gave you a shot at the mental health. Have you seen it? I'm sure you've seen it work.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the model, and I don't think there's any question left about is that the right way. It is the only way that's worked at a large scale, which is you can deliver services endlessly, but if someone doesn't have a stable roof and a home and a bed, you're never going to get past that first step. But if you can first house somebody and then deliver whatever supports they need on site. And it's just not that expensive compared to the cost of keeping someone homeless. So in our community, you asked about here, I will say we have one of the best run, and I just retired. I'm kind of biased. I just retired from another volunteer job. But I spent 12 years on the commission for the Housing Authority for the city of Santa Barbara. In fact, my last meeting was just last week.
Oh, really?
And I have so much respect for that crew. It's led right now by Rob Fredericks and his team, and they do it right. They just do it right, and they've done it for over 50 years. So we have a great model of how it can work. We also have an incredible nonprofit group. You have Transition House for families experience homelessness. You have the Rescue Mission. You have PATH, which is formerly the Cacique Shelter, formerly Casa Esperanza. And so each of them do a piece of the puzzle. The problem again is scale, and we don't have enough beds and we don't have enough infrastructure to do it for everyone that needs it. And so that's really the question on the table. You may have seen Los Angeles a couple of years ago passed a pair of measures that actually funded homeless services at a remarkable level. But you can see today, even that the money alone doesn't solve the problem. So it's huge, it's complex, I think it's critical, and to this day, it was one of the first issues I got involved with, but I would say if I had to pick what's the most critical, that would be in the top two, top three maybe. Yeah.
You do a lot, so I was reading. It took me a while, but what drives you? I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I've read about somebody your age who's kind of done this much, and a lot of it's volunteer leadership. But what gets you up in the morning? I mean, why do you do all this?
That's a fair question. I think, and I don't mean this to sound trite, but I grew up. I never worried about all these things that I work on. I grew up. I have a wonderful family. Didn't worry about have a roof over my head, food, had great schools. I feel like, what's the saying, to those to whom much is given, much is expected. Right. I mean, it's that notion of paying it forward, or however you phrase that. And I enjoy it because I like, personally, what I get out of it is the experience of seeing something work. So I like the challenge of seeing a problem and trying to fix it in some manner or figure out a solution, either something that hasn't been tried before or something that's only been tried at a small scale, and can you do it bigger? And I think that's a very human thing. I think there's a lot of us get satisfaction out of doing good, fixing a problem. And I tend to be a glass half full person on virtually everything, including philanthropy. And maybe that's why I ended up accidentally doing the fundraising side of the work. And most fundraisers are accidental, in case you haven't heard us say that before. Very few 5-year-olds say, I want to be a fundraiser when I grow up. But I do think that that's a part of it, is that it becomes, once you learn that that's the tool for all of this, money is just the tool. That's what it's for. And if you can fundraise, there's a lot of people out there with plenty. And that's one of the interesting things of and really I think one of the tragedies of our moment, is that there are so many people with so much, at the same time that there's more and more people with so little and not enough. And so bridging that, philanthropy isn't the solution in itself. There's a lot of things that go into how do you make that more equal so that everyone has a fair shot. But it can be a starter, and philanthropy can be the venture capital, if you will, to try something out in the nonprofit side that otherwise might not have happened. And I love the sector because it's, this is probably not entirely fair to say this, but if government, you can't get the political will. So to do something through a governmental structure of any level, federal, local, you name it, you have to have the political will. If you can't build the political will, it's a non-starter. To do it in the for-profit sector, you have to have a profit model. So you have to be making money somehow. And if there's a problem that needs to be solved, but you can't figure out how to make money from it, it's a non-starter. So in between those two spaces is where the nonprofit sector lives, and it sort of draws from both. So you build political will among enough people that want to give, and institutions, and you build a model where you can generate enough revenue to get it going, and that's where the nonprofit sector lives.
And if you can do it in a sustainable way, you can make a big difference.
You can build on it. And if we think about the successful institutions in our community, most of them started as fairly radical nonprofit notions. I mean, they were this little idea that probably a whole lot of people said, I don't think that's going to work, Bob. But here we are. So so that's the satisfaction in it.
That's fantastic. Well, we're out of time already. Geoff Green for president. Geoff Green for president.
That's not a job I'm seeking, but thank you.
Congratulations. Thanks for what you've done for the community, seriously.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.